Letters to a Young Therapist, Chapter 23, Resistance, October 4th. Dear Laura, Iraqis have a saying, you can wake up a sleeping dog, but not one who is pretending to be asleep. This morning's paper featured a picture of Emma, who I'd seen as a sullen, recalcitrant teenager. She was a PK, a preacher's kid, whose parents brought her in because she wouldn't eat meals with the family. Emma has just graduated at the top of her law school class. I chuckled to think that now she was utilizing the debating skills she'd honed on me and on her parents. At Emma's first session, she stared out my window with her arms crossed over her chest. When I said I hated to waste my time and her parents' money, she quipped, "Cry me a river." She began talking only after I mentioned how restful she was after all my talkative clients. Then she talked non-stop. The problem was that she didn't listen. So I listened. I looked for ways into her world, for metaphors that might touch her, and new ways to frame her situation. I waited for her to ask for my opinion, and after a few sessions, she did. She yawned theatrically while I answered, but she actually followed some of my suggestions. I always let Emma have the last word, an important skill in dealing with stubbornness. Once she'd taken her best shot, she would calm down and be less defensive. Then during that grace period, I could sneak in a small point. We waltzed this way for many months. She never really embraced therapy, but as long as no one tried to make her admit it, she made some progress. By the time Emma terminated, she was sharing meals with her family. Psychologist Carl Rogers spoke of the paradox of change, that people only seriously consider change when they feel accepted for exactly who they are. Resistance to change is a natural part of the human condition. Whenever I hear someone described as not taking criticism well, I want to ask, who does take criticism well? We all want progress, but we don't like change, especially change imposed from the outside. No matter how crushing our problems, we generally prefer them to uncertainty. And when push comes to shove, we don't want to trade our problems for the problems of anybody else. To a certain extent, we are our problems. To lose them is to lose our identity. We therapists can lead a horse to water, but we can't make him write in his journal and exercise daily. The truth is, people do exactly what they want to do. Our biggest challenge is helping people want to do what's in their best interest. You have heard the old joke, how many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? One, if the light bulb wants to change. Education, example, support, and exhortation all work if the client sincerely wants to change. People may come to therapy because they are afraid of losing someone they love, but often they don't want to work all that hard. In fact, reluctant clients may use the therapy as a tool to get people off their backs. Hey, don't bug me about my drinking. I'm working on it in therapy. More often, people change in response to love. Many a parent has quit smoking when her kindergartner begged her to. Many an adolescent has settled down when his grandparents took him on a fishing trip. It's impossible to stop a roaring river, but you can change a river's flow by digging a small ditch or building a small dam. It's almost always better to deflect resistance than to meet it head on. There are many ways to do this. One is to say something like, I agree with part of what you're saying, but there's a small part I wonder about. Or even better, I wonder if you have even the slightest doubts about your current position. Or, I can see you dislike what I am suggesting, but I wonder if you would consider trying it for a few days. You can tell a story about a person similar to your client who did things just a little bit differently. Or you can discuss the advantages for a person not to change and hope your clients will argue with you. When clients ask me if they have time to solve a problem, my favorite answer is, you have just enough time. There are two rules for power struggles: avoid them or win them. In therapy, they are almost impossible to win. After all, clients are in charge of their own lives, but often power struggles can be won indirectly. When I worked with Lynn, a shy woman who rarely had fun, I encouraged her to exercise. No way, she would argue. Lynn had 100 reasons why she couldn't exercise even 5 minutes a week. Finally, I suggested a dog. My thinking was threefold. It would give Lynn an attachment, always curative with depression. It would also provide her with a topic of conversation, something that would help her get started with other people. And walking her dog, Lynn would crank out a few endorphins. Lynn agreed to adopt a dog, not for my reasons, but for her personal safety. Duke was a big dog who loved to romp outdoors. Soon Lynn was going farther and farther each day. Racing after Duke gave her enough exercise and excitement that she didn't need medication. In addition, she visited with dog owners on the trail, and she maintained a constant supply of Duke stories for her coworkers. Motivating others involves an almost mystical state of being in tune with them. This is called by names such as being in sync or clicking. We know it when we feel it. Scientists have a term, limbic resonance, that refers to the innate ability of mammals to sense each other's emotional states. Change is most likely to occur when we sense that the people with us are attentive and accepting. When we feel that, we are more open to new experiences. Composer Benjamin Zander says he knows when people click with him because they have shining eyes. Those shining eyes are good signs you have connected with your clients. Often people come to us when they are ready to change. Timing is everything. If a suggestion is timed properly, it can be very small and still change a life. If improperly timed, a thunderbolt won't do much. The art of therapy is to be just a tad ahead of clients, to be ready with a remark that makes the client say, "That's just what I was thinking." Poorly timed interventions can be worse than none at all because they ruin the potential for later attempts and they inspire a great deal of resistance. For example, I erred in suggesting that Lynn attend a single adults meeting at a church. She didn't have the social skills or the confidence for that event and suffered an embarrassing evening. Never again was I able to persuade her to take that kind of risk. Often a way to know that our timing is off is when we find ourselves not wanting to say something. Most likely we are sensing that the client is not ready to hear what we have to say. Usually ignoring our own sense of resistance is a bad idea. One exception to this is addictions. People who are hooked almost never want to discuss their habits, and sometimes it's too dangerous to wait until they are ready. However, when I find myself explaining too much, repeating, or arguing with clients, I know I have hit a wall and I won't be breaking it down. When clients don't change, we may think to ourselves, "What? You're not taking my brilliant, carefully considered, expertly delivered advice?" But life is always more complex than that. Emma's behavior toward me wasn't about me. Personalizing resistance just makes it harder to overcome. Laura, use resistance to gather information about yourself and your clients. The only way you can truly avoid resistance is to stay home from work. Chapter 24, Failures, October 10th. Dear Laura, you are being too hard on yourself. Missing an important theme in a discussion is not an irreparable mistake. Important material circulates over and over. You will catch it next time. In the ideal case, a client comes in with a problem, and the therapist and the client develop a respectful, caring relationship. They solve the immediate problem and perhaps explore other aspects of the client's life. Then the client terminates with an evaluation of the therapy and feedback for the therapist on what was helpful. The therapist uses that last session to solidify gains, discuss potential problems and victories, and to praise the client for genuine growth. This best-case scenario doesn't happen all that often. You asked me once, "What about your failures? What were your worst mistakes?" I have avoided answering you until today. It's painful and a little humiliating to admit defeats. I've never had a client commit suicide or assault anyone during our work, but a few of my screw-ups have been doozies. Some failures were predictable. I've often been unable to help chaotic families with deeply entrenched problems, especially if they rarely showed up for appointments. Sadly, I never figured out how to help character disorders, which is our academic way of describing people without consciences. For a while, I saw a man who cheated, charmed, and fornicated his way through life. Norm's character structure was set in cement, and I was just another person to hoodwink. Eventually, Norm's business failed because of his corrupt practices, but his long-suffering wife chose to stick it out. Time wounds all heels, but it wounds their families too. With my conversations and assignments, I wasn't of much help to Norm or his wife. Other failures were a surprise. Clients who seemed reasonable, engaged in the process, and meeting their goals would suddenly drop out or sabotage the therapy in ways that wrested defeat from the jaws of victory. If the deck was stacked against therapeutic success from the beginning, I did only a brief post-mortem. I asked myself, what could I have done differently? What did I miss? Then I'd move on without much more soul-searching. However, if I had held high hopes for the therapy, I would feel pretty stung. Usually I would try to convince the client to come in for one last session to talk over our difficulties. I would replay the therapy with my office partners and ask for alternative approaches. I would toss and turn for nights reflecting on my own stupidity. In retrospect, some mistakes were obvious. I had a long-term therapeutic relationship with a gentle mother of 3 who appeared stable, hardworking, and happily married. Hannah had been a teenage alcoholic, but she had achieved sobriety through Alcoholics Anonymous. In her 20s, she stole prescription drugs from the pharmacy where she worked. She was fired but not arrested. When I saw her in her 30s, she claimed to be drug-free. The puzzle was that as a therapy client, she reported almost no problems at all. She chatted amiably about parenting and small tensions with her husband or coworkers. Occasionally, I asked her if she was drinking or doing drugs, and she adamantly denied it. But one Tuesday, 3 hours after an appointment, Hannah was arrested for possession of cocaine. I should have viewed Hannah's lack of problems as a red flag. Busy working people don't pay $90 an hour to chat. I should have been in better contact with her husband, who later told me, "Hannah's been weirder than hell. I had my suspicions." I should have exercised my hate-it-but-do-it muscle and required regular drug screens. Hannah was sweet and I was polite, but all that nicey-nice time landed her in prison and cost her a marriage. I worked with a bulimic client named Rosemary for 3 years. I tried everything with her: in-depth discussions of her past, feelings journals, food diaries, assertiveness training, stress management, cognitive behavioral therapy, and finally even inpatient treatment. Rosemary made no progress, and after a year, I, the author of a book on eating disorders, passed her on to a new therapist. Something she said in our last session made it clear what had gone awry. Rosemary said, "I'm sorry you couldn't find the right way to help me." I realized she saw me as possessing an infinite bag of tricks from which I would eventually pull a cure. She was waiting for my magic to arrive. I should have said, "I'm not a wizard. Only you can fix things." One of my saddest cases was a teenage boy whose father killed himself in a drunk driving accident. After the funeral, Brandon came in with his mother. The two of them fought constantly. Brandon ran away from home, yelled at his mom, and stole from her. At one point, I suggested that perhaps Brandon should move into a group home where there would be more control. The mother and son never returned to therapy. When I analyzed what had happened, I gave myself a well-deserved kick in the pants. These two traumatized people only had each other. Their fighting was a way to stay connected and diverted from their pain. I was a fool to think of separating them. Other cases were harder to second-guess. I saw a woman named Moira who never stopped talking. I tried to wait her out. I thought that perhaps, for reasons I didn't understand, she needed the floor 100% of the time. As time passed, I attempted to confront Moira about her volubility, but I couldn't get a word in edgewise. She was terrified to come up for air and listen to me or anyone else. She may well have had what Melanie Klein called the manic defense, which is basically an attempt to outrun depression by never slowing down to think. Once I actually suggested this to her, but Moira didn't pause long enough to consider the idea. Mercifully for me, Moira eventually stopped coming in for her gab fests. Neither she nor I felt she'd made any progress. In the end, I don't think she wanted help. She wanted praise, but even for compliments, she wouldn't stop talking. After all these years, writing about my mistakes causes my stomach to hurt. I don't like to fail, and I'm not one to easily let go. But it's more than that. I worry I hurt people who came to me for help. I regret I couldn't manage to find keys to unlock intractable clients' resistance. As I said, I'm not one to easily let things go. An art teacher I respect doesn't allow her class to use erasers in their drawings. She says, "Don't erase a mistake. Make it beautiful." After a rambling, unproductive session, I could often save something at the end. I might say to my clients, sometimes after a murky session, clients will have a revelation on the way home that really clarifies our discussion. Or, "We touched on many subjects today. The results are not yet visible to us, but we have begun an irreversible process." These cryptic remarks kept clients searching for meaning until we met again. Often when we did, they would have discovered something luminescent in that drab previous hour. As a parent, a therapist, and a writer, I am on target maybe 70% of the time. To expect more of myself would be expecting more perfection than a mere middle-aged mortal can muster. I remember my Uncle Otis's advice. On his 60th wedding anniversary, a party guest asked for his words of wisdom. Otis was embarrassed by the request, but took his duty seriously. He said, "I try to get a good night's sleep, and get up every morning, and do the best that I can." Chapter 25. Healing Solutions from All Over the World. October 21st. Dear Laura, last night Jim and I drove into the country during sunset. It was harvest, and all the grain dust in the air made the sun look like a persimmon. Our state smelled like a big box of cereal. Lights blinked and bobbed in the fields, and old trucks waited in long lines by the Walton elevator. 15 feet tall sunflowers nodded in the ditches. The coats of horses gleamed in the slanted light. All over the world, humans imbue the sunset with meaning. Other totemic objects are plants or animals that are different from the norm. Nature's aberrations are worshipped or feared. For a year, we had an albino squirrel in our neighborhood. Whenever I happened to see him, I felt a burst of pleasure, followed by other feelings: hope, serenity, and even awe. He disappeared, no doubt devoured by a predator, and I still looked at the place he used to scamper. The Plains Indians revered the white buffalo. They believed that when a white calf was born, good fortune would come to the people. And I just read in the New Yorker about the incredible golden spruce that lived on the Queen Charlotte Islands off British Columbia. Tourists, residents of the island today, and the Haida Indians worshipped this tree. A man cut it down in a terrible act of vandalism, but even he must have felt it was sacred, sacred enough to destroy for symbolic reasons. All cultures have systems of healing. Universal treatments include good food, music, touch, truth-telling, and forgiveness. Many Native American cultures have talking circles, where adults sit together and tell stories about whatever issues need discussed. Drums, drinks, and the burning of aromatic plants all serve to cure many ills. In many places, people enact purification and forgiveness rituals. Talking to friends, enjoying children, and creating art are ways of healing that have been used for millennia. Laughter is a part of many healing systems. There is an Iraqi saying, 3 things are calming: grass, water, and the face of a beautiful woman. Bosnians say, there is a bond between the heart and grass. In the Middle East, troubled people often visit saints' houses. Usually these are peaceful retreats staffed by kind people who assist the travelers. Guests visit with each other and share food. They pray, cry, walk, and rest. Most return home feeling much better. Buddhism has an ancient and sophisticated set of practices for calming and healing. Breathing properly, meditating, and focusing on the impermanence of all things are healing activities. Some of our most successful psychotherapy incorporates aspects of Buddhism. Victims of repressive governments sometimes repair psychic damage by documenting the abuses of an authoritarian regime or working for human rights. Bringing family over from the old country is profoundly healing. Once I asked a Sudanese man what would help him heal from all the deaths he had experienced. He said, I want to be with my people. When I can help them, I am happy. Traditional healers and customs work because they are believed to work. Almost all mental health cures involve placebo effects. In therapy, people improve partly because they expect to improve. They count on what a Vietnamese boy I met at a high school described as the beauty and mystery of hope. Praying works whether or not people believe in God. Prayer is a more active, trusting process than worrying. Most people find talking to God more satisfying than talking to Freud. Also, with prayer, there is no need for diagnosis, treatment, or comprehensive health insurance. Attention is curative. People feel better when they feel heard and when they feel loved. When a Hmong shaman puts on a horse head mask and dances around a room chanting, his patient understands that someone is paying attention to him and that his family has carefully arranged and paid for this attention. Love regenerates dispirited and desperate people. As poet Joy Harjo wrote, love changes molecular structure. Most refugees don't take to therapy as we practice it. Sitting in a small room with a stranger talking about problems is a pretty odd idea. Besides, they are focused on survival issues such as paying rent and getting shoes for their kids. Therapist Sarah Alexander encourages refugee clients to design individualized healing packages. These are plans to do certain things that will propel them into new lives. I knew a woman from Srebrenica who had lost 22 men from her family in one day. She told me, "The pain has killed my heart." She rejected psychotherapy but was extremely pleased by free tickets to the circus. Fun with her family was part of her healing package. You will soon see clients who give you the opportunity to be less ethnocentric and Eurocentric. In this new century, all of us will need universal methods of healing. We won't necessarily keep all the Western boundaries between mind and body, spiritual and worldly, and work and play. We'll assign our clients massages, walks in the woods, music, tai chi, and aromatherapy. We will write prescriptions for potlucks and dances.